for each layer, I'm going to talk about course design a little bit. So that's the next page. Okay. So because students bring a diverse experience, backgrounds to our classroom, well, first of all, I think the first thing we can do is to try to create a very inclusive and welcoming environment for them. I think most faculty members can do this, yeah. But the challenge, well, for us sometimes is that we don't consciously realize we have implicit, biases and assumptions. And those implicit biases and assumptions can affect how we interact with our students, how we do evaluations of assignments and grade, and how we, for example, encourage students, right? So one suggestion I will make is to, self-assess our implicit biases and assumptions from time to time. Yeah, for example, talking about myself, speaking of myself, well, I often think, well, I'm very inclusive, but sometimes I have something I overlook as well, or something I don't know very well, or things that I just haven't thought about, right? So this is the area that we need to, really, consciously think about and reflect. So one strategy is self-awareness and self-reflection. So that's one strategy that we can do. And I would like to point out one thing, which is providing equal access to resources. During COVID-19, this becomes more important. For example, I've been working with some faculty members who have their requirements or expectations for the Zoom meetings with their students, right? They try to have overall expectations. For example, I would like you to have your cameras on, your microphones on. Yeah, I would like you to sit in a learning ready or work appropriate environment. But this creates some challenges for some students, right? So for example, one student told me that he was hiding in his closet, to join the meeting, to join the Zoom meeting. Yeah, that's his quiet spot, right? So how can we accommodate those learning environment? Yeah, different learning environments, yeah, especially during COVID-19. So this becomes a hot topic. Sometimes we don't want students to do everything they want to do. For example, they drive and they participate in a Zoom meeting, but we do need to provide more flexibility. I think, well, that's one thing we need to think about. Yeah. So, but I will also like to point out, equal access doesn't mean identical access. It doesn't mean everyone has to do the same. For example, if a student asks for flexibility, for example, she cannot have her camera on, or she could not participate in the Zoom meeting today, do you have a backup plan, right? Do you have a backup plan? So when we talk about, proactive strategies to accommodate student differences, we talk about, respect for cultural differences, backgrounds, and we also need to think about, physical, learning adjustments. So that's one thing that we may not consciously realize. Yeah, physical accommodations, learning accommodations are part of the diversity that we're talking about in the classroom. Okay, now let's talk about the next layer. So the next layer is the cognitive diversity. I think faculty members have a lot of room to do things here more effectively, yeah, and more efficiently. So in this layer, we are talking about, how to design your course and how to teach a course that we can develop students' diverse, respective taking skills, and especially the long-term lifelong mindset, right? So this is, what is called the cognitive diversity. And because, well, this often happens under the guideline, under the teaching of you, the professor, right? So, and this area is also called the acquired diversity. Students observe you, students learn because of your guidance, because of your teaching. So the diversity, the cognitive diversity can be, significantly influenced by you, the professor. So why does it matter? So this is the question, why does it matter? So in general, well, the cognitive diversity can develop students a world view that they can see different things. Yeah, so not just one view. There's a popular, misconception that when it comes to the classroom, students think, well, I learned something that, for example, that's the tradition, that's the only way, that's the mainstream content in my field, right? But the professor's responsibility, should be broadened to include different views, different backgrounds. So students can see, the perception of the world from other people's eyes. So that's why it matters. I had some proactive strategies in this slide. And the first one is intellectual flexibility. So in this area, well, we encourage faculty members to not just, teach mainstream perspectives. We do, for example, content-wise, we do need to respect traditions. But for example, do we have another way to learn the traditions? Do we add new information to traditions, right? Do we look at the same thing generation by generation, decades by decade? Yeah, can we add new information, or can we look at the same information differently? So first of all, professors are encouraged to, have a mindset that they allow intellectual flexibility, okay? And then another thing is to emphasize the range of identities and backgrounds of experts who have contributed to a given field. Let me give you one specific example. For example, in one of my courses, I asked students to provide 10 references to that paper. It's one of the papers I asked them to do, right? Well, traditionally, I would say, okay, find relevant, peer-reviewed journal articles to support your arguments. But if I consciously realize that I may not encourage, diverse identities and backgrounds of experts in my field, I could just let students do whatever they want, right? But this time I could say, one of the 10 references must be from an international journal, right? Or from an international scholars, in my field, things like that. So consciously, I encourage students to go outside of, the traditional ways of doing things, and they have to look deeper, right? So another way we could do it, to emphasize the range of identities and backgrounds of experts, is to go outside of your field. So we have many multidisciplinary, collaborations between researchers. Sometimes we may not realize there are lots of information or journal articles out there, between among interdisciplinary collaborations. So this is the area that you can also encourage your students to do. So what I meant is, in your assignment design, in your instruction, sometimes you can just make it very clear that this is your expectation. I would like you to go outside of the box to include other identities and backgrounds of experts, all right? Another thing I would like to share with you is to use diverse examples to illustrate concepts. Why this is important? Why this is this has something to do with the cognitive diversity, because as I said earlier, sometimes we just look at the same thing or just teach the same content over and over, but we don't provide diverse examples to illustrate same concepts. I came from China. I remember something very clearly. So when I was in the Chinese education, we tend to look at a problem and examine a problem very closely until we became an expert. Years later, when I came to the United States, well, someone told me that the United States systems encourage you to look at the same problem different ways. So with that in mind, I began to observe whether, this is true. Yeah, somehow I thought, yeah, it is true, because yeah, in China, a high school student could be a math expert because they examine something, yeah, in depth, right? But sometimes they forgot, you could solve the same problem 100 ways. So that's a very interesting, description about different educational systems. It may not be 100% true, but I found it very interesting. So I think, well, it broadens my way to look at things differently. So in my own teaching, I often use diverse examples. Sometimes it doesn't have to, the diverse examples don't have to come from me. Sometimes I can describe one example and ask my students to contribute, different examples. For example, I would teach cognitive diversity this way. Then I ask students to demonstrate 3 different ways, right? Yeah, so that makes much easier, and then that also gives them some responsibilities and ownership of contributing different examples. And another strategy is to encourage students to be the creators and evaluators of the content instead of, just a passive listener. You may have heard about this, I think, a lot, right? Ask students to do something instead of listening to you. But what can you really do? For example, yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, I went to a professor's classroom. He's a faculty member in petroleum engineering. And he was doing lectures every day, every week, until I said, well, can you do it differently? Can you teach your content differently? And he said, well, lecturing is very common in his field. So I did a student focus group with his students, 2 student focus groups, because that's a large lower division course. And nearly all the students told me the same thing. Yeah, my professor is fine with his lectures. Yeah, we don't want something else. But I insisted that faculty member to try different things, right? To try to make his classroom a little bit more active learning. So he did. So he included, discussions, he included some minute projects, and I did 2 student focus groups later. And his students said, wow, I like to talk. I like to share this. Well, that project was interesting. So what is the story, told us here? Yeah, so sometimes we can underestimate our students being a creator and being an evaluator, right? But if we give them the opportunities, yeah, they can bring out lots of diverse perspectives, diverse ways of, addressing the same problems. You will be amazed how talented how creative they could be and how passionate they could be. So yeah, so that's what that story told me. Yeah, and yeah, and eventually that professor's teaching evaluation was increased from 2.8 to 4.6. He made a record in the history of his department for this course. So yeah, I was so proud of him. Yeah, because he was willing to, broaden his way of teaching, to increase the opportunity, this opportunity for students to acquire, cognitive diversity, right? So I think you have a lot of ways to do things in this area. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You could take some small steps, right? Look at your assignments and maybe consciously add a couple of things that students have to do a little bit more, yeah, to include diverse perspectives, all right? Okay. All right, layer 3 of diversity, I think it's called pedagogical diversity. Well, at this level, I would like to share with you a story. And I have a question for you. Keep in mind, if someone asks you this question, can a top student fail? Why even a top student could fail? Let me share you with one story. So a student was a top student, and one day she flunked her psychology course. What happened was the professor only had multiple choices with lots of tricky questions, and fill in the blank, you have to use the exact words. Yeah. For example, if you say pedagogical diversity, if you say pedagogical inclusion, right, interchangeably, but you could fail because the textbook says it's diversity, it's not inclusion. So that's the background. So that student, that student heard the news from the seniors that you have to cheat before you could pass this course. And that student said, I'm not going to cheat. I will study hard and harder and I will pass it. I'll pass it. It turned out she didn't pass it, right? So her advisor said, what? Well, you failed in yeah, in this course or in any course? Well, just retake it. Yeah, you'll make it. That student said, I can't make it because yeah, that instructor, that professor was rigid. She only has two ways of two items in her exams, and one is in the midterm, another is the final. So that student said, I can't pass it. Well, but I could do better if it's a writing project, if it's a collaborative project, it's about analysis and evaluation, I could do it better. So her advisor talked to that professor. The professor gave her a new set of makeup test, and she passed. That student was me years ago, right? So at that time, I was not professionally trained in pedagogy. As an undergraduate student, I described my whole experience as that professor was rigid. Her quizzes are tough. She only has one way to do it, and she only has a midterm and a final, right? So as an undergraduate student, that's all I could say. And years later, when I came to OU, I heard about the same thing, for example, from business school. The undergraduate students told one of the professors the same thing. So I reviewed the professors' teaching evaluations, I did focus groups. Eventually, I found out that students may describe their learning experience differently. So we need to find out more. So for that business professor, it turned out that, his quiz items, some of the quiz items were off the topic. right? For example, some of the concepts were in the supplementary materials. Students didn't review those, right? So that's one concern. Another concern was the time. The time was not enough for students to take the quiz. So that's the information I gathered. But before I gathered those information, the business professor told me that students should work harder because my standards are very high and I'm not going to lower my standards, right? And I will only have midterm and final. I'm not going to change it either, right? So just like me years ago, for students who are good at other type of learning, analysis, case studies, writing, and such, they cannot do very well for memorization, quizzes, multiple choices. So what does it mean to us? That means professors, we do not teach for all. We unconsciously just teach for one kind of students, okay? Yeah, so we may not teach for all. So is teaching for all possible? I'm not saying that you have to accommodate every single details from your students. But what I'm saying is when we do our course design, we need to think about students have different learning styles. Some are good at, memorization, basic facts and principles. Some are good at the higher level of learning, right? Analysis, evaluation, synthesis. Can we balance the two, right? Can we balance the two so students have different ways, to succeed? That's what I mean. So yes, the question is, why even a top student could fail? Yes, a top student could fail. Another example was I was working with a professor in the math department. One student with the National Bronze Scholarship also cried out the same thing. Why even I, could fail in this professor's class? When I reviewed the course design and assessment, it was the same thing. Yeah, so the design was only for one type of students. Okay, so that's the concern. All right. So, so back to some proactive strategies for pedagogical diversity. Well, first of all, there's a very interesting analogy that I heard from one of the conferences I attended. Yeah, in Seattle, well, years ago. I remember that very well. So the analogy was, when you design your course, should your course be like a buffet or should it like a specialty restaurant, right? Isn't that interesting? Well, I prefer a buffet type of course design, which means I diversify my course content. I include opportunities that students can explore, can discover multiple perspectives, right? If a student doesn't like broccoli, he can still have bok choy. If a student doesn't like beef, he can still have fish. If a student doesn't like anything, she still could, explore something else, right? So that's the diversity of your content, the offering of your content. If we offer the diversity of our content, then naturally we need to teach our content in multiple ways, right? So you could have, instead of just having lectures, you could have small group discussions, you could have role plays, you could have case studies, project-based or problem-based learning. Yeah, so just diversify your teaching methods a little bit. And naturally, when we have diverse content and diverse teaching methods, we need to think about whether we assess our students' learning effectively, right? For example, there are some very useful alternative assessments in addition to quizzes, exams. For example, projects. It could be individual projects, it could be collaborative projects. It could be community-based learning. It could be a website design or a journal article, or no, journaling, yeah, e-journaling. It could be, you know, an infographic. So ask yourself whether, you know, you have different ways to assess students' learning. But of course, your assessments should be aligned with your goal. For example, if your goal is to ask students to evaluate the COVID-19 situation at OU, for example, your assessment won't be effective if you just have a multiple choice or true or false question, right? You need to build up, you need to set that environment for students to explore the COVID-19 situation at OU, right? So the alignment is important. All right, and another strategy is to collect midterm survey, midterm feedback from the students. Literature demonstrates that if you do a midterm survey for your students, I would say probably the 5th or the 6th week of your teaching of the semester, well, that will help you, you know, get a very good teaching evaluation at the end. Yeah, students would appreciate that information, that opportunity to provide you information. So in summary, we have talked about 3 layers of diversity. The first one is classroom diversity. I think many faculty members are doing a good job. They consciously pay attention to the classroom diversity. The second layer of diversity is the cognitive acquired diversity. Faculty members can do more in this area. And the last layer of diversity is the pedagogical diversity. I think faculty members can also do a lot of things in this area. All right. And I have something else. Well, as a new faculty member, I would like to talk about some challenges that you typically would or will experience. So the first one is the teaching persona. Many of our new faculty members, you know, may not gain students' respect and trust very well in the first year. I remember I came to Oklahoma 15 years ago. I had taught at Penn State before and with good teaching evaluation. But my teaching evaluation in the first year in Oklahoma was a nightmare. I redesigned a large lower division course from face-to-face to a blended course, but it didn't go well. And of course, I learned. And one thing I found it interesting was some students just didn't treat me well or didn't treat me professionally. Maybe I was looking young at that time. Maybe I was not firm on some of the things I wanted to do. And maybe at that time I was eager to, you know, try to look like I'm very friendly. I'm too friendly with them. But one lesson I learned is I can be available, I can be friendly, but make no mistake, I'm not your friend, I'm your professor, right? So no matter what happens in the classroom, I'm a professional. I have to be professional before I expect others to treat me like an established professor in the classroom. So I would say for the first year, don't get frustrated if you experience certain things. Yeah, but keep your expectations firm and communicate well with your expectations very well with students multiple times. Yeah, so that's one lesson I learned. And for female faculty members and for international faculty members, I also experienced you know, some challenges in particular. For example, the first year I taught here in Oklahoma, I asked students to call me Hong, my first name, Hong, right? Yeah, because I tried to, you know, to present myself that I'm casual, I'm so easy to get along. Yeah, but over the years, many female faculty members think, they can call you your first name, but they call other male faculty members Dr. So-and-so, right? So that's interesting. So a couple of years ago, I had a very, big workshop about microaggressions from students to instructors. Many female faculty members, international faculty members attended. At the end of that workshop, we all agreed that for junior faculty members in particular, ask your students to call you Dr. So-and-so, especially female faculty members. Yeah, right. So that's a strategy that the majority of the female faculty members in that workshop concluded. But of course, you can still go with Kathy if that's what you want, right? But for many junior faculty members, sometimes when they don't have the authority, on their face, they may experience some challenges. Yeah. Okay. So that's one lesson I learned. Yeah. But today, well, in my syllabus, for example, I would say, or emails, I would say Dr. Lin, instead of Hong, because if I put Hong in my email, of course, that's a signal that I want my students to call me Hong, right? But I put Dr. Lin, in particular, So, but if that doesn't bother you, it doesn't matter. Go with what you want. But I wanted to share with you this example. All right, and the last thing I would like to say, is the professional development. Well, welcome to OU, and your first year, you will experience lots of opportunities. But let me assure you that you'll get busier and busier, and your research agenda will get busier, and the expectations of your research agenda will get higher and higher. So that said, for your first year at OU, I will encourage you to join us, especially our Center for Faculty Excellence, to get some professional development, right? It could be workshops, it could be consultations, it could be collaborations. Engage with us earlier, because the first year, you still have lots of time to explore. You may not have the luxury of time to explore the next year. So set a very good foundation for your teaching. So course design, teaching, feedback, student evaluation, get a good grip of your teaching. Because usually in your fourth or fifth year, if you don't teach well at the time when you want to apply for your tenure promotion, your chair may come to us. They may ask us to help you. At that time, it could be late and it could be more challenging, right? So engage with us. It doesn't have to be, well, I have a teaching problem, so I want to engage with the center. No, it could be just an idea. It could be just a redesign of an assignment, okay? So that's what I would like to suggest. All right, for the time being, I think, I will conclude my talk. So 3 layers of diversity, and then engage with us early on. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. Does anybody have any questions or discussion or things that you wish we had covered, or questions that have come up in your teaching so far?
Well, if I could just
Kathy,
and sort of tag on to your final point there. I've been doing this for longer than I care to admit, but it's just a couple of years. And one of the things that I've really gained from interacting with CFE is time savings in teaching better. So I'm able to accomplish the same thing, but with more effective and efficient use of my time. And I am adjunct, so I don't have the increased research responsibilities and expectations that you do. But it has been tremendously helpful to me, the sessions that I've attended and the workshops. So I would just offer that as your research is increasing, you guys have offered me a lot of tips and tools and skills that have made it easier to get my classes done. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. You have attended a couple of my workshops. Yeah, I remember you, and you provided some very insightful feedback to your colleagues. Yeah, I remember that. Thank you. Anyone? Does anyone have a question?
Okay. Well, people might be thinking of questions. I'll just remind everybody that Kevin Buck's presentation will be sending a link. He's not able to make it today, but he's going to record something over the weekend, and we'll send that around and also post it on the Canvas site. So if you were looking forward to the instructional technology part of this, which I think many of us were, it's coming. It's just not going to happen this afternoon, unfortunately. Hong, do you mind if I share one of those check sheets that we had found?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. So let me see if I can share my screen. Where did it go? Right here. So I can put the link to this in the chat, but this is just kind of a check sheet of different things that you can do in your classroom, both in terms of your self-reflection work as well as the content that you're choosing, your instructional practices, how you interact with students, how to be an ally for students with gender and identity that might be different than yours, and then how you can also create an environment for positive student-student interactions that makes the room more inclusive, those sorts of things. So I'll put the link to this in the chat. I think this is a really great place to start to go through, because it's kind of affirming too, because I think most of us are probably doing many of these things already. But then also getting ideas about how we can add to that portfolio to really make our classrooms as inclusive as we can. And not everything on here is going to work for your classroom, but there are many things on here that'll work across STEM, humanities, fine arts, social sciences. So I'll put this in the chat.
Yeah, I agree with Megan. Well, this resource is very, I find it very useful. Well, I would suggest you take a small step, scan the page, and then maybe pick one that you're not familiar with, and then try it out. Yeah, you probably have done some of them, but look at just one thing that you haven't done, right? Try one, or one per course, or one per semester. Yeah, and then make it permanent. Make it part of your teaching persona. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so following up on Karen's message in the chat too, next week is going to be the libraries. There's fantastic resources in the libraries, not just books and journals and articles, but also films and music and data analysis and video resources. What else? Makerspace with 3D printers, all sorts of resources in the library, as well as an awesome faculty and graduate student research area in the basement, which I'm not sure is open this semester, but it's beautiful, and hopefully as soon as it opens, you can check that out. So I definitely recommend coming next week and learning more about all the different resources that the libraries have to offer as well. And Jane's added some more resources in here too from the Provost office that are also helpful for those of us wanting to learn more about inclusive excellence and the efforts going on across campus.
Yeah, and I recommend that checklist, Megan, that you posted. CUSN also has a very good checklist, which is almost similar to that. But we'll keep building on resources from CFE, but also from our side. So thank you, Hong.
Yeah.
And thank you, all of you.
Any more questions? Okay, well then we'll let you go 15 minutes early. You have an extra 15 minutes.
Yeah, just let us know when you need help or when you want to talk. Yeah, we're always here. All right. Yeah. Well, good to see everyone. Yeah. Welcome aboard, new faculty members.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.